latest Mobycon Academy webinar. Today I'm pleased to be joined by one of our former interns who is now studying in Barcelona in Spain, Lisa Nienaber, who recently presented to our team about the impacts of CO2 on our transportation sector and what possible changes we can make to start shifting some of that CO2 to more sustainable transport options. So without further ado, I pass it over to Lisa. Welcome.
Thank you, Melissa. Yes, I want to talk to you about CO2 a little bit today. And the big question is obviously, why should we talk about CO2? Although I'm pretty sure every one of you is aware, we make a little bit of an update. So the share of EU greenhouse gas emissions, around 25% of them are caused by the transport sector, so one quarter. And in the Paris Agreement, also a lot of EU states and the EU itself agreed to reduce these emissions, included the ones of the transport sector, significantly until the year 2030. And then I now have chosen the country Germany as a little bit of an example state, especially because it's one of the biggest, I would say, like industry states in the EU. So in Germany, around 20% of all emissions are caused by the transport sector, and also the German government has set a goal to reduce these emissions until 2030 significantly and by around 42%. In order to do so, it's important to know what is the cause of these emissions. And this graphic is quite good for that. So it shows first the number of ways. So how many trips are kind of done, and with motorized vehicles, it's around 50, almost 60% of all trips are actually done by car, and that car, and translated into transport performance, it's even a little bit more, considering that often it's more longer distances, and this then has also a bigger climate impact. This time, maybe even numbers show a little bit better. So here you can see that motorized vehicles, it's around that 60% of all number of ways that it's used, but it causes 75% of the whole climate impact of the whole transportation sector. So this really makes obvious that we have to reduce the car trips, we have to reduce the car use in order to reduce the emissions in our transport sector. In order to do so, one has to check where the trips are done. So what is the trip distribution in a sense of the length? And here's the trip distribution in distance for Germany. And here you can see that around 60% actually of all the trips are done for distances less than 5 kilometers. And this is very interesting, especially for bicycle mobility, because this is a distance which is very well suitable for bicycles, which also shows this nice little graph. It represents the time one person needs from door to door for a certain distance. And these two red lines now show the intersection between bicycles and cars and pedelecs and cars. So, which means basically is until around 5 kilometers, it is still faster to go by bike than to go by car to go somewhere. And with the pedelec, it's even until 7 kilometers. So until these distances, it's more convenient and faster to use bicycle or pedelec. Then is the question if it's like, is it already been used today? So how is the model split today? And this graphic shows the model split of Germany, Netherlands, and Switzerland. And not surprising, at least for me as a German myself, it's that actually under 5 kilometers, it's not that bicycles are the dominant mode, it's more still cars. So bicycles are around maximum 20%, but motorized vehicles, it's often more than 50% are done by them. So there's a lot of potential that could be done. And I did some calculations, some scenarios to evaluate this potential. In order to do so, I needed some numbers for the CO2 emissions for each mode. And I started with the bike, where I just said that the CO2 emissions of bikes are insignificant. This is first, I just use the emissions during the usage, so not the production of either like a car or a bicycle, just during the usage. And I also went not crazy and said like, okay, we humans need food and this also needs CO2. I did not go that far. So I just said insignificant small. Long train distances are mostly done with trains charged by green energy. That's why only 1 gram of CO2 per person per kilometer. That's the unit. Bus is around 30 gram for long distances. Battery energized vehicles, it depends a little bit on with what kind of energy it's been charged. So around 20 to 50 there are gases. Train short distances, it's out of 50 around. Bus short distances is 83, and motorized emerged vehicle is 150. This obviously significantly varies among different cars, but this is a good middle ground, I would say. So the first scenario is about the short distance. And the assumption is, okay, we have at the moment for short distances, meaning under 5 kilometers, a model split of around 50% bike and around 49% of cars. And we want to increase this to 25% of car bikes or 50% of bikes. The calculation goes as possible. I only considered the emissions by the vehicles or by the cars, and the idea was that everyone who switches to bike first was driving a car. So it was like one-on-one exchange, and I took the person kilometer, which I calculated with the distance distribution and the person kilometer for each distance type, and calculated them with the emissions per person kilometer. And what I got is that with the scenario 25%, there was a reduction of around 2.5 million tons. And with the scenario 50% bikes, there was a reduction of, let's say, 9 million tons. In comparison, the transport sector of Germany causes 163 million tons. So the reduction was around 1 to 2% or around 5% less of the transport sector. To evaluate these numbers, I also included this study of the Umweltbundesamt, which looked at the potential of bicycle mobility, and they came to quite similar, I would say, endings or the results. For their scenario with 25, they came up with 1% CO2 saving, and with 50% bike trips, they came a little bit less, around 3% of CO2 saving. And considering which investments need to be done in order to reach 50% of bike trips, one has to say that 3% of CO2 savings is not the most, or even 5 is not the best argument. One also has to see that it brings new potential for the long distance. So if the cities is better with the bicycle infrastructure, also the bike plus train combination gets more attractive. So this is we're going to see in the scenarios for longer distances. Open up opportunities, and we want to see first like one commuter switching from a car to bike plus train, what kind of impact he or she can have. And the second one is that the trips over 50 kilometers are reduced significantly with the motorized vehicles. The first one, I just assumed around 30 kilometers traveling, 220 working days, and the ones who were listening well, now wondering why I have 220 gram and not 150 gram. This is because I assume that this person is traveling alone or commutes alone, and that's why I did not take the person kilometer, but the vehicle kilometer. In the train, I said it's 51 grams, so it's also on the higher end. Calculating one commuter causes, if he or she does this commute with the car, around 2.9, let's say 3 tons of CO2. And with the train plus bike combination, only 0.6 ton. So it's a saving of around 2.25 tons of CO2. And to give this, put a little bit into perspective, one has to consider, for example, that a beach must grow around 80 years to absorb 1 ton of CO2. And on the other hand, it is said that actually to reach the 2% goal, a person user should not be more than 2.3 tons. So only with usage of cars to commute, you already got over this value. The second scenario is about the long distance and the increases of public transport. First idea is to double it from the current value, and the second idea is to do a 50-50 evaluation. Now I again use the 150 gram and the person kilometer, and for the train I took a middle value of around 30 gram per person kilometer. In numbers again, a lot of numbers. The CO2 emission at the moment for the public transport sector are 1.7, and for motorized vehicles, 45. With the scenario, one could save, with the 32 scenario, one could save 7 million tons, and with the 50-50, even 11.5 million tons. And if one would assume that most of these commuters or most of these trips are actually still done or even done by the electric trains, which even have less emissions, the upper limit for the savings would be 8 million tons, or even 50-50%, it would be 18 million tons that could be saved. Yes, as a little summary, and to put it, to give it a different unit, I would say, we now, I now put the savings in the unit of household energy use for a year, and these household energy uses for a year I got from the Environmental Agency in the US. So the short distance, as you can save around either 300,000 households of energy use, or with the 50% bikes, even 1 million household energy users. And with the long distance, you can either save around 850,000 household energy users, or even up to 1.4 million energy households. And it's only about the saving potential in Germany. And obviously 1 commuter switching to train and bike, 2.26. So, and now at the last section of this presentation, I wanted to introduce another point, because I believe that even a better unit to understand CO2 a little better is obviously money. So to put a monetary value to the CO2 emissions, and a good concept for that is the social cost of carbon. the SCC, because the SCC is an estimation of the long-term damages done by carbon emissions. It considers extreme weather events, sea level rises, or food insecurity, and also the rising healthcare costs, destruction of property, or the increased food prices. One example, I'm not sure if everyone's aware of, is that this summer there was a big flood catastrophe in Germany, which destroyed several villages along small rivers. And for these 3 days of extreme weather conditions, the German government has now set up a fund of around 30 billion euros to repair these houses again and to support the locals, which is obviously necessary to rebuild everything, but just to have this number in mind, what only 3 days of weather can cost. Yeah, but it's obviously not really easy to estimate such a thing because it's a lot about what will in the future happen. So it's challenging questions like, okay, what path will the emissions take? How will the emissions affect temperature? And then how will then the temperature cause damages? There are various models who try to make assumptions about the future or about the development. And the one used for this implementation is the dynamic integrated climate and economic model from Nordhaus. It considers the damages, relation growth, temperature sensitivity, decarbonization assumption, and the carbon cycle, which, for example, is there's still carbon enclosed in glacier ice, which will over the years be emitted to the air through that the ice is melting. Yes, but that's, but in this model itself, there's also various scenarios. One is considered about the emissions. The first idea is that there's no change from today at all. And the second is that the average temperature increase of the next 100 years is 2.5 degree max. And when you're wondering why 2.5 and not 1.5, is that the author itself does not believe that, or says it's unreasonable to think that we can still reach this 1.5 goal. It's at the moment not really an option anymore, and the 2.5 goal is still to be reached. The second point is how to evaluate damages. The first approach is that future damages are evaluated the same as today's damages. That means that a flood who's happening in 100 years will be evaluated the same as a flood who will be happening in a month. And the second idea is that the future damages will be discounted, meaning they don't have the same impact on the calculations as damages today. And all things considered, these are the SCCs, so the prices for 1 ton of CO2, which goes from around 30 euros in 2020 as base parameters. And if you can go up to the future damages and today's damages equals to 540, 560 euros. And I believe it's not even the highest, so there were a lot more different scenarios, but these are, I think, the ones at least I found most interesting. But for future calculations in this presentation, I mainly focus on this range from around 30 euros to around 100 euros. Because this is also the range a lot of countries set their SCCs or their carbon prices at the moment, but this very much varies as well. So actually the German Environment Agency just a couple of months ago set the SCC price at around 200 euros, but that doesn't mean that the German government does the same. The German government sets the price at around 25 euros. It should increase over the next years to 50 euros, but it's still quite low. The EU future price for exchanging carbon at the stock exchange is 50. The US price is 32, whereby there are a lot of discussions that this also needs to be increased, but it's still better than the Trump administration, where it was about €1 per ton CO2. So let's not talk about it. Remembering the impact we calculated and taking the best thing we can think of, so with 50%, we could achieve a saving of 20 million tons CO2. And what does it say in money? So it's around 20 million tons CO2. I take the lower end, so it's 32 euros per ton. That results in that we could save costs or avoid costs of around 640 million euros. And this is quite conservative thinking. The SCC for Germany alone in 2019 was over 150 billion euros. And if we take the SCC to reach the 2.5 goal, then the cost avoided would actually be 2 billion euros. Then, as a last point of the presentation, I want to go down even a little bit more to think, okay, I'm a planner, and I have a city, so what kind of impact can have a city itself? So we have a city of around 100,000 residents. These are the emissions. We say we take an SCC of 100, which is quite good already, and the person kilometers are calculated mainly for the less than 5 kilometers and over 50 kilometers, again concentrated on these two distances. And with the model split, which is similar to Germany, I then calculated the different person kilometers for the different modes for the different kilometers. And then we say, okay, we as an agency or whatever want to increase cycling for under 5 kilometers by 33%, and for over 50 kilometers increase train and bike by 30%, which calculated down is that bikes increased 5% points and public transport increased by 7.5 percentage points. That means a city can avoid costs by reducing CO2 for under 5 kilometers around 12,000 euros, which is quite nice. But even over 50 kilometers, it's even more. There is a difference of almost 600,000 euros that could be avoided by reducing costs of just a city. So this is the impact only one city can have. And yeah, that's from my side. I hope I did not overwhelm you with two numbers and that you could take away a little bit. And yeah, thank you for your attention.
Presentation, it certainly is a lot of numbers for people that aren't necessarily used to looking at them. But I think you made some really great points within there. I think a lot of times when, as individuals, we're talking about making shifts and how do we as individuals change our impact, oftentimes it feels insurmountable. But I think, the way you've pointed out, especially with the bike-train combination, what we as individuals, what that impact could be. I mean, 2.2 tons doesn't seem that much, but it is almost entirely the impact if you're driving every day that you're having on the environment. So over the course of a year or the course of several years, just us as individuals could make even a small change, regardless of where we are.
Yes, no, that's exactly what I wanted to show. It's the difference, I would say, like levels. It's like every one of us can have a good impact, and every trip counts. But on the other hand, it's also okay it does matter to invest in this infrastructure, because you also need to get the overall numbers you need to get down.
Of course, and we still need, if we want to, stimulate those bike train trips, we need to make sure that people can actually get to the train or rapid transit bus, if that's what's in your respective city. We need to make sure that getting there in the first place by bike is safe and that there's storage there, which are other conversations, perhaps not for today, but certainly have an impact. I like that you also pointed out about the social cost of carbon, because, oftentimes we're looking at what emissions do our cars make, what does the transport sector make, but we're not talking as much about the impact. And the case study, the very real case study for a lot of people living in Germany and Belgium and even the south of the Netherlands was that these extreme weathers impacted them for several weeks. And I like that correlation between the two, and that it's not just related to people for example, in the global south or the west coast of the US that experiences wildfires. This is something that's happening everywhere. I wonder, in your research, did you find that there's a number of cities that are taking into account that social cost, or is it still relatively not underreported, but not really reflected on as much as it should be?
What I find, so it's mostly on the, not city, but more on the national level. And I would say it's more the question of how much I know that, for example, the US has something like this, Germany has something like this, so that carbon emissions need to be considered. But the problem is that the numbers are still so low that they don't really impact the planning. The only thing which I heard, for example, that in Great Britain, they actually have set the number or the value of SEC quite high. And they also use it really much about, okay, so what kind of damages will you cause by building something like this and this? So they have a little bit of not, okay, what kind of things will be saved? So what are you causing? So they have a little bit of a different approach, and it seems to work out quite well. So it seems that in Great Britain, they're a little bit further ahead of something like this. So I would say it's more that it's still too low, often the values, that many countries already have something like this, but it doesn't have the impact it should have.
Do you think if that information was, of course it would have to be communicated in a way that the average person can understand, but do you think that there would be an impact in terms of switching people's mindsets if they understood whether it's the future costs of the future social costs of carbon, or even the cost of the planned infrastructure as in Great Britain? Do you think if that was better communicated, we might see people understand why the shift is important?
I think that's a difficult thing to do, or it's on the one hand so abstract, and still a lot of people, even like you said, these catastrophes came to you in front of your house door. It's still very far away, and so I believe it's more, it's a little bit, how can I say, that making it less attractive to use a lot of carbon emissions.
Right.
So to just make it more expensive, or have it like other concepts that people just see, okay, if I have like a sustainable way of living, I have a lot of impacts, and maybe also not too much focus on CO2, and rather show people like you can save CO2 and it's like nicer living and nicer cities, and your overall life will improve by doing things like this. I think that might be help in my experience more than say, okay, in 10 years it will cost you that much if you don't change. It's I think too abstract.
Yeah, so I think in that, with that in mind, the responsibility then lies with our leaders or with the people that are helping to plan the cities. Oh, that makes sense. Yes. So I guess one final question, and you did touch on it a bit, but what could we in the transport industry, those working in sustainability, what are two things that you think we could be doing to help push local governments, regional, even federal governments or national governments further in terms of making these investments now for the cost savings and for the CO2 savings in the future?
Yeah, I would say on the one hand, even show them, okay, this is like not only the CO2 emission, blah, 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 but also, okay, this is what will cost it. This is the negative side when you don't change it. If you build this extra lane, this is what will cost. And on the other hand, also show the opportunity, because I believe, or I have the feeling that often just the idea is still this can't be done, like it's not possible, but to show them a little bit the options and show them, okay, if you don't do this, there will be impact, but you could also do this and have like much nicer streets and less traffic, and yeah, show them a little bit both sides. So show them a way, show them an idea of where it could be, I would say.
Perfect, yeah. Show them what they might not want for their future, and then show them what inevitably most of us do want for our cities. Greener spaces, obviously, less cars, more social connection.
Yes.
Win-win, and at the same time, maybe they don't care as much as we do perhaps, but reducing those greenhouse gases to make our world a little bit better.
To make them interested in a lot of costs will come if you don't do it, and then like a little bit more, see, even the people will like it if you improve a little bit more. So it's cost saving and people will like you for it. So it's two good things.
Win-win, exactly.
Win-win.
Well, thank you very much, Lisa. That was very informative. I know I learned quite a bit myself, and yeah, I look forward to seeing what else you do in the near future, and hopefully meeting up again here in the Netherlands, or if I happen to make it to Barcelona, I'll come and come for a visit.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. In the meantime, good luck with the rest of your studies. If anyone has any questions for Lisa, please do send them to info@mobycon.com, and we'll be happy to pass them on, and she can provide you with her valuable insights. Do stay tuned. Next week we have another webinar coming up with a similar sort of theme. We're looking at how to plan for e-bikes, so again moving trips from motor vehicles to more sustainable transport options, with Mary Elbeck and Stephen Kurz, and we'll be joined by a guest, Helene Baus from Mike Sonar, to talk a little bit about wayfinding. We do have a lot of other sessions coming up in the near future, so if you're not already a subscriber for Mobycon Academy, please do so. And otherwise, we will see you next time. Thanks, everyone.